11:05, and we are going to start our last of our series of 3 webinars on financial abuse that's been produced by the Southend, Essex and Thurrock Safeguarding Boards. So if it's okay, I'll just do some housekeeping, then I'll introduce a very brief quiz and then our speakers. I'm Paul Hill, I'm the board manager of the Safeguarding Partnership in Southend, and if I can move on to the next one, I don't think you need to know much more about me. For this webinar, if you wouldn't mind keeping your mic muted and your camera off. We ask for the camera off just so that it's easy to identify the speakers. And I understand that some people's internet connection might struggle if everyone keeps their camera on. I need to repeat, can you put your mic off, please, because I'm getting quite a lot of background noise at the moment. Okay. We'll be recording the session, and the slides and the recording will be made available. Just so that you know, we will have opportunity for questions, but in the last 2 sessions, we have had so many questions, we haven't managed to answer all of them during the webinar. So we will be recording what's in the chat and getting the answers to those questions to you. We will also be using a Slido poll, and there'll be a link to this Slido poll in the chat. At the risk of sounding repetitive, could you turn your mics off, please? Sorry, I really can't hear anything while everyone's got their mic on, so I need to stop for a second.
Paul, if you could unmute, you've just been mute. We've just had to mute everybody because sadly people were missing the message. We've still got a camera on as well.
Okay, so thank you for that. I apologise for the repetition on muting, but it is very difficult to hear when everyone's mic's on, especially as we have so many on this webinar. I don't know what you heard. So we'll be using the Slido poll. There'll be a link to the Slido poll in the chat. And when we get to that, if you click on the link, complete the poll and then return to the webinar, it's a fairly easy process to use. A little bit about who we are. We are the Safeguarding Board. So I represent the Southend Safeguarding Board, and we're a statutory organisation operating under the auspices of the Care Act. And we have a number of duties under the Care Act that we fulfil. And we have a clear strategy about what we're going to deliver and how we support the partnership. The strategic partners of the Safeguarding Boards are police, local authority and health, usually clinical commissioning groups, but include many others. The reason that we're doing these seminars is predominantly because of the need that's identified through our partners. Sorry, if we can move on. No, not the next slide. Predominantly because of our partners. We reviewed what was going on currently, and because of the current restrictions, we accepted a number of points of view about the abuse that's changing most at the moment is that of financial abuse because of the restrictions placed on people. So this is the 3rd of the 3 webinars. The first was around doorstep crime. The second was about organisational response, and now, of course, you're attending this, the legal requirements and legal impact of financial abuse. So I don't think you're here to hear me talk much. So we're going to do a quick poll first. I'm hoping that you found in the chat the link to the Slido poll. On your screen now, there is some advice on how to reach it. It asks a very simple question, but pertinent to what we're doing today. And as soon as we can, as soon as people start responding, we'll include the response to the poll on the screen. Here we go. That's amazing. That's the best we've had so far. And the question was, do you know how to report a safeguarding concern? And so far, 100% of people have said yes. Okay, I suspect we'll stop when we get to about 70–80% of the people attending, as there is always a difficulty for some in reaching the poll. Of course, the follow-on question to this, the question we're not asking, is do you know what a safeguarding concern is, and are you absolutely confident about what to report and what not to? And maybe we'll explore that a bit more as part of this webinar, particularly around financial abuse. So there you are. I'm impressed. 96%, and it's fluctuating around 95 to 97% of people say they do know how to report a safeguarding concern. I think we've proven the point. We know that the vast majority of people know how to report a concern. All we want to do now is to ensure that you understand the financial implications of financial abuse and actually how better to support people through that process. So if we can return to the slides, please, Chelsea.
Slight delay, should be with you now.
Excellent. Just for those not sure, the three safeguarding boards have separate separate phone numbers and email addresses to report your concerns to. If you have any concerns, please use those numbers. Remember, these slides will be shared at the end of this webinar. So if we can move on to the next slide. The bit about National Safeguarding Adults Week, it was started by the Anne Craft Trust in 2018 and was designed to highlight areas that fall within the auspices of safeguarding adults. And we've engaged with this Safeguarding Week every year since. And it's a time when safeguarding adults can be focused on. For those of you who work in the world of safeguarding, you'll know it would be very easy for the needs of the children's safeguarding to overshadow sometimes the needs of adults. So it's important that we recognise needs across our whole community, and this helps us do that. Okay, if we can move on, please. This is what we're here for today. Financial abuse legislation and lasting power of attorney. We're lucky enough to have two very experienced speakers, Iffy from ECC and Julie from the Office of Public Guardian, both of whom have spent many years in their field and are experts in the areas they're going to talk about. If I can ask that you hold your questions and we'll answer them at the end. But rather than try and remember them, please just add them in the chat and we will capture those in the chat and I'll bring those up at the end. Like I said at the start, it's almost certain that we won't have opportunity to answer every question, but we will capture them and get responses to you. So without further ado, if we can move on, and I'll hand over to Iffy, who's the solicitor at Essex County Council.
Sorry, Paul, to interrupt. If I could just ask the eager members of this webinar to stop taking the quiz. That's actually coming last. So we've got a few people taking the quiz on Slido already. If you could hold off and wait until the end for that one, please.
Did they get it right, though?
Yeah, they are.
Excellent. Okay.
Hello, everyone. It's Ifeoma Njoku here. I'm the solicitor from Essex Legal Services, in particular Health and Adult Social Care team. I've been a solicitor with Essex County Council for the past 10 years and absolutely enjoy the position. I'm also the advisor to the Essex Safeguarding Adults Board, and this area of work actually sits very well within the kind of work that I cover. It's interesting that we are dealing with this because obviously it's an issue that is on the rise for obvious reasons. And this is part of what we'll be looking at in the slides that follow. Paul, if you could just move to the next slide, please. All right. Like I just mentioned, we've had an increase in reported sexual abuse in the UK. The increase has been as a result of an improvement in the awareness levels and also the reporting levels. It's improved to a certain extent, but I think there's still room for improvement because, as you'll see from my research and also from my own experience in the cases that I deal with, it's obvious that there are a lot of cases that are being, that are going on undetected. for obvious reasons, for some reasons. And this is why we have this awareness week, you know, which would then help us build a bit more on how we could improve and hopefully provide a better service to our communities. Next slide, please. I have, from my research, also found that the Neighborhood Watch had done their own statistics, and they have reported in the report of the 2008, and it says that 70% of financial abuse is actually perpetrated by family members. This is actually very common, and I have found from my experience as well that a lot of the financial abuse that happens is actually happening at home. It actually says that 60 to 80% of financial abuse takes place at home. That's no surprise. And also 15 to 20% is happening in residential care homes. We also have the situations that connect to personal budgets and direct payments. This is also another type of area that could involve, that financial abuse could arise in. Next, please. There's also a survey from 2014, which was carried out by the Citizens Advice Bureau. And the outcome of that actually says that 73% of those who were actually involved in that survey had experienced being coerced into taking out credit for perpetrators. 42% had financial liabilities transferred into their name, obviously from the perpetrator. And also we've got 43% have experienced theft. And finally, we've got 18% who have their properties destroyed. So this gives a bit of an insight into how big the problem is. And they were talking about 2014. Next slide, please. All right, so I guess the next question is, what is financial abuse? We probably all have our own idea of what it is. But what we have in terms of definition is provided by No Secrets Department of Health Home Office document 2000, which defines financial abuse as financial or material abuse, including theft, fraud, exploitation, pressure in connection with wills, property, or inheritance, or financial transactions, or the misuse or misappropriation of property, possessions, or benefits. That was a mouthful. Yeah, but this is the definition we have, and it does actually sit very well in what we see in the day-to-day experience of financial abuse. Next, please. All right, so what does financial abuse look like? I've got the bullet points there, and the first there is theft. That's an obvious one. Fraud. Internet scamming comes in, and that internet scamming is also on the rise because of obviously the wide usage of internet. So a lot of scamming is happening, a lot of financial abuse happening via internet scamming. And we also have coercion in relation to adults' financial affairs. This could include connections with wills, property, inheritance, or financial transactions. We also have misuse or misappropriation of property, possession of benefits. So we've got those normally with benefits either being misappropriated by whoever is managing the adults' benefits. And also another very interesting one, which I probably would think that most of you might think, oh, how does that come into the mix? But, you know, moving into someone's home without their consent, that's another way that you could financially abuse someone, because you're moving in, you know, living free of charge, most likely, not paying rent. All that is financially connected. So again, that's what it could look like. Pressurizing someone to actually change their will in your favor, that's another way of financially abusing someone. And that happens quite a lot, and I've seen in my area of work where these cases have come up. And also charging excessively for services. And this would normally be by tradesmen, and the most culprits would be the elderly, who mostly live on their own and are taken advantage of. Next slide, please. All right, so what are the signs of financial abuse? I've actually made reference to the Care and Support Statutory Guidance, which is the provision that we normally rely on in terms of safeguarding as well. And also we've got the CARE Act, but in terms of the guidance itself is the Care and Support Statutory Guidance. And I've referred to paragraph 14.25. It does say that the indicators of financial abuse include change in the living conditions of the adult. That is clearly one very obvious sign. They could lack heating, clothing, or food. That's another sign. Inability to pay their bills, or unexpected shortage of money. Unexplained withdrawals from an account. Unexplained loss or misplacement of financial documents. The recent addition of authorized signers on a client or donor signature card, or sudden unexpected changes in a will or other financial documents. These are signs, but obviously, like I always say, these are not the only signs. These are just some of the ones that we are aware of, but I'm sure that there are others that, you know, would be out there. But what I advise is to make sure that we keep our eyes and ears open and do the best we can to just make sure we identify those signs. Next slide, please. All right, so what's the importance of identifying financial abuse? I guess that's another question that we ask ourselves. Why is this so important? Well, first and foremost, the impact is always negative and could be dire in some cases. It could lead to death by the victim. They could lose their property. And this would then cause other issues such as depression, stress. They could deteriorate health-wise, feeling of worthlessness. I know that in some of the cases I've dealt with, service users have felt so bad that they felt, how could they allow such a thing happen? You know, not being able to afford necessities that they would have been able to afford if not for being financially abused. And then we have, you know, the final bullet point there where I thought to raise this because it's important to realize that this is not just a local problem. This is not just a problem for you and I, a problem for all of us. Every one of us is actually involved in this, should be involved in this. And I say this because we've got adults who have been financially abused, and as a result of that financial abuse, their finances deplete. And the connection between their depletion in finances and the contributions they make to services that the local authorities provide is important. Because once they are actually financially abused and they deplete in terms of funding, then it means they can't actually pay to the level that they would normally have paid had they not been financially abused. And I'm talking about those in receipt of services from the local authority, social care wise. So what then happens is when this money has gone, they haven't got enough, so they don't have to, you know, contribute as much as they would have, which then leaves the local authority to pick up the difference. And then you can imagine if this is happening in 50% of our elderly adults, for example, how much? So this is a huge amount of money, which then means the local authority picks this up as a result. And then what happens? The public purse suffers. And who pays into that public purse? It's you and I. We all paying for this via our taxes. And the more it happens, the more the taxes go up. So I just thought to raise the last bullet point because it's important to just make it personal and, you know, make us realize how important it is that we do our best to do, you know, try and curb the problem. Next slide, please. All right, so those at risk, who are those that we think are at risk of financial abuse? I've got the first bullet point there. I've said the elderly are the number one at risk because they're elderly and obviously are vulnerable, are not able to do a lot of things that a lot of us young do. So they are the first at risk. I've mentioned the vulnerable people generally, vulnerable either because you lack capacity due to health problems, or, you know, dementia could be another issue that could obviously affect your capacity. And also, it could also be those who have to depend on other people to have their managed by other people. These are also a category of persons that are at risk. I've also included minority race, those in the minority race, and I say that because a lot of people who fall under this category might struggle with language. Because of that language barrier, anyone that would abuse would use that as, as an opportunity to, strike. A person who is also isolated, I'm talking about those who live on their own with no support network, they are also at risk. And they would normally be at risk from loan firms, rogue traders, etc. So these are the list again. And I always say my list is never exhaustive, but I'm sure there are other categories of people at risk, but this is what we have for now. And again, it's a case of making sure our eyes are open, ears are open, and just making sure we stay focused on what is to be achieved. Next slide, please. On this slide, I just want to point out that it's not just those who lack capacity that are at risk. We also have those who have capacity, who are either because they are easily coerced or unduly influenced. And the style used is normally emotional grooming and predatory behaviors that the perpetrators would normally use. So it's not just those that are lacking in capacity that are at risk. Those with capacity are also at risk, especially those that are facing undue influence or coercion. So just to make that point clear. All right. So the likely perpetrators of financial abuse. It's no news that family members would be one, because if it's happening at home, then the chances are that it's the family members that will be doing this. So yes, perpetrators will include family members, care providers in care homes, and also care providers at home, i.e., agency workers that come in to provide domiciliary care at home could also be perpetrators. Care providers could also financially abuse by way of invoicing for services they have not provided. And unfortunately, those with lasting power of attorney and deputyship powers also tend to exploit that position. Unfortunately, it does happen. And when that happens, then it may be a case that they might have to be replaced and their powers revoked. Also, anyone managing a direct payment account could also be a perpetrator. And this could include forging of accounting records, pay slips, and also misappropriating funded funds under the direct payment. Also, tradesmen, I've mentioned this before, tradesmen are also likely perpetrators. They could charge for services, overcharge for services, and sometimes not even provide a service at all. So those are the likely perpetrators. Again, the list is not exhaustive, but I'm sure there are others out there. Again, it's something we need to keep our eyes open about and do the best we can. Next slide, please. All right, so in terms of what to do when financial abuse arises, I hope, and luckily from the poll that was set earlier, I'm glad that a lot of us know where to go to, and it seems that a lot of us know what to do when it arises. However, I'll just repeat what needs to be done here. It's important that when financial abuse arises, that an alert is raised in accordance with the local authority multi-agency safeguarding adults policy and procedures. Every local authority should have their procedures, and you apply whatever applies to your own local authority or area. And what would normally happen is that a local authority would then carry out a Section 42 inquiry, Section 42 of the Care Act, and I'll deal with that in this next slide as to what criteria there is for Section 42. And what that asks us to do is that it says here, safeguarding inquiries under Section 42 provides local authorities with the duty to follow safeguarding processes where an adult has a need for care and support. It doesn't matter whether or not the local authority is providing the support, as long as they have a need for care and support. That's one category. That's one criteria, and is experiencing or is at risk of abuse or neglect, and as a result of those needs is unable to protect himself or herself against the abuse or neglect or risk of it. So that's the criteria for triggering a Section 42 inquiry under the Care Act 2014. I've also just mentioned at bottom there that it's important that we get the police involved where a crime has happened. So a lot of the time when there's a financial abuse, it does amount to a criminal offense, and so should be raised with the police. However, I know that in my experience, there have been cases where the adult in question is a parent and the perpetrator is the child of the victim. And most times parents don't want their kids getting into trouble. And so what then happens? The victim says, I don't want this matter reported to the police. And if they have capacity to make that decision, unfortunately, we have to respect it. And so can't move any further than that. Unless, of course, we're dealing with a case where there's a public interest to protect. But in most cases, you find that when it involves financial abuse, it might not meet that level. And so we have to respect the adults or the victim's views. I've also mentioned at bottom that there's a need for cooperation with other agencies. In fact, the CARE Act at Section 6 and 7 does encourage that we do that. And it's important to have a multi-agency approach at every given time, because I find that generally when you've got all the agencies involved together, in order to solve the problem, you end up having a successful outcome. And that is always the best approach to follow. Next, please. Obviously, in terms of safeguarding, which is under the Section 42's inquiry process, is also advised that some steps or some actions are taken, and this would include considering the welfare of the victim, the preventative measures also that could be applied, and also the risks alongside, as well as any investigatory actions. All those need to be taken into account when dealing with these inquiries. And also you need to consider the adult at risk expectations and also identify and focus on their desired outcome, because it's not really just about us. In fact, it's not about us, it's about the victim. So person at risk, you need to check what exactly do they want out of this and focus on that. Also consider available solutions to the person at risk. And this could mean that if they don't have an LPA or deputy, then that might just be the answer to solving the problem. Also have a well-planned strategy, which would include a multi-agency approach. Like I did say, I've always hammered all the time, multi-agency approach is always the best, and utilizing all the skills of partners involved. And when I talk about the agencies here, this could include the police, health professionals, social care, probation service, CQC, care providers, advocacy services, etc., etc. Again, the list is not exhaustive here, but these are the main ones that came to mind. Next slide, please. All right, so after all, just talked about the problems and how we solve these problems. And what also came to mind is the fact that as much as we're dealing with that side of things, we also need to consider the fact that whenever we're doing the safeguarding inquiry process, that it's done properly. And this case came to mind, and it's the case of London Borough of Hounslow versus a father and mother. It's a cost case in the Court of Protection. Unfortunately, in this situation, we had a local authority raise a safeguarding inquiry due to an alleged financial abuse against the mother, who was actually assisting in managing the son's benefits. So in this case, dad was actually the appointee managing the benefits of the adult in question. And the monies from the benefits was being paid into mom's account. And I think that was probably what raised suspicions. But then again, I did ask myself, was that enough to actually take the case to court? And next slide, please. I'll explain in the next slide what transpired. It did happen that the case went to court, and eventually the local authority withdrew the application from court after the mom had produced bank statements that obviously proved that she had not misappropriated funds. Unfortunately, by that time, the local authority had spent £15,000 in legal costs, and the father's solicitors had spent up to £50,000 in legal costs. And you can imagine the judge in the case was furious, and he felt that litigation was conducted disproportionately by both the local authority and the father's solicitors, and that they had failed to focus on the main issue of whether the bank statement into which the benefits were paid evidenced any misuse of funds. I completely agree with the judge, is Judge Eldergill. And I personally would have thought that that would be one in that position would have done, was to find out, was there really any misappropriation of funds? And it was easy to find out by checking the bank statements. But I'm not sure that obviously that happened here, and hence they found themselves in this situation. And as a result, the local authority was asked to pay 90% of the cost of the father's legal fees, and I believe ex gratia payments as well to mom. So it's just important that we bear in mind as local authorities that we need to carry out thorough inquiries and investigations before we decide to press for any charges at all. I think that's the end of my segment, and I hope you found this helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Iffy. There's been a number of questions, but we'll capture them at the end if that's okay. And time's pressing on, so we'll move straight on to Julie from the Office of the Public Guardian. Julie, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I've worked at the Office of Public Guardian, known as OPG, for 8 years, and the civil service for over 30 years. So OPG protects people in England and Wales who may not have the mental capacity to make certain decisions for themselves, such as about their healthcare and their finances. So OPG's vision is to strengthen supportive decision making, will encourage freedom of decisions for all who can make decisions, support for all who could, and provide protection for any who can't. Our mission is to uphold the principles of the Mental Capacity Act in England and Wales. Our purpose is we believe everyone has the right to choose. Where people lack mental capacity, we support decisions in their best interests, and we provide excellent services that suitably reflect the needs of our customers. Next slide, please. So, planning for our future. So, making an LPA, lasting power of attorney, is a natural part of advanced planning. The map here shows that compares the LPA take-up to dementia prevalence. Broadly speaking, the areas where you're most likely to have a diagnosis of dementia are the areas where you're least likely to find people who have had an LPA. Can be found in all regions of England. There is a slide, please. Thank you. We have large parts of society who do not have an LPA, but are more likely to benefit from one. If people don't plan for the future and need support in their decision making, it will have a direct impact on public services such as those that you want. For example, NHS Scotland report 58% of patients occupying a hospital bed past 6 weeks as a direct consequence of not having the correct power of attorney in place. So you never know what's going to happen. So we encourage people to plan for it now and have everything in place just in case. Next slide, please. People lose an estimated £10 billion of fraud every year, like if it's already said. People of all ages and backgrounds are victims. However, as you already said, older people are represented as victims of particular frauds, including pension and investment scams, postal scams, doorstep scams, and telephone scams. Some older people are especially at risk, either because scammers target them or because they're vulnerable. A total of £30,857 is reportedly lost to pension scammers since 2007. Some of the most ways those struggling with the early stage of dementia, Alzheimer's, is their susceptibility in being the victim of phone scams. Responding to texts on tax refunds, we get all those, claiming money back from something, and revealing bank details to sophisticated fraudsters. If you have an LPA in place, a friend or relative can help to step in that works for both parties, such as not having credit cards available for large purchases or only having cash available in the house to prevent any bank details being given away over the phone. Next slide, please. So when can we investigate then? So if you have a concern about an attorney or deputy, and I'm going to add in here guardian now, because legislation came into effect on the 1st of July 2019 on the missing persons. So we received our first case at the end of November 19, and at the moment we've got 5 current guardians in place. So if you've got a concern about an attorney, a deputy or a guardian who might be the one who's financially abusing someone, you report the concern to us, or obviously, as if you said, to your local authorities which you work in. So the OPG can investigate a concern if there are enough details saying that the donor has got a lasting power of attorney or a deputyship order. So we need quite a lot of details about the donor, or P. We call P if there's a deputyship order. The concern relates to the powers attorney or deputy holds under the registered power. For instance, we can't investigate a case regarding healthcare if there's only a finances LPA in place. If the concern is against the deputy or attorney's behaviour, not a third party, unless there's a failure of the deputy attorney to take action in their role. We can investigate concerns whilst the attorney or deputy or guardian was acting in their capacity for the donor or P. Or the concern raiser believes that the donor didn't have capacity to make the decision at the time it was made, or believes that the donor was coerced, but that's another story of coercion, which is touched on. So any of those cases under that criteria will be investigated. When we begin an investigation, the very first thing we do is assess the individual's capacity. OPG should only be acting on cases where they can't act. So we want to empower the individual to do that. So the first thing we do is commission a visit from the Court of Protection Visitors. We often get cases where the donor is found to currently have capacity to deal with the concerns raised. In some cases, they may need support in doing that. In those cases, we cease our investigation, but try to support the donor to make decisions where possible. Where we don't have the jurisdiction to act, we share the information with relevant authorities like yourselves, and including the police. We also work with our partners and stakeholders to ensure they have relevant information about the services we are providing. We can't investigate former deputies or attorneys or concerns where P or the attorney are deceased. Although in deputyships, we can call in a security bond if there's evidence of wrong. Next slide, please. Safeguarding. So financial abuse, neglect. The misappropriation of donor or P's money is the most common thing we see. We would consider an attorney, deputy or guardian doing this if they weren't applying for all the benefits P's able to receive, weren't maintaining P to an acceptable standard, not furnishing them with clothes, food, living conditions, if he's already touched on these in her presentation. Failure to pay fees and personal allowances, not doing so risks the care home withdrawing their support, or putting the donor P in a position where their health deteriorates. So we encourage best interest decision making. So an example, is it best to move P or the donor closer to you so you can support, or further away for specialist support? So we've also seen many professionals use the estate of someone without capacity as an opportunity to increase their bills. And complaints are made by the adult or risk sometimes about their deputy or attorney. It's not common, but it does happen. And it's a reminder that capacity can return. Next slide, please. Okay, It's recognised that LPAs are powerful deeds, and OPG sets out very clearly that people should take great care when choosing someone they trust to act on their behalf. Guidance is provided and there are other inherent safeguards in place. Vitally important that people choose someone they trust to act on their behalf. LPAs only come before a judge when things have gone wrong. With the vast majority of LPAs, there is no abuse. We are not complacent about the potential for fraud or misuse of the powers, although. There are 4.7 million LPAs on our register as at the end of March this year. In 1920, we registered 864,000 LPAs. From April this year to October, we've registered 306,000 LPAs, which is down 40% on last year. However, we think COVID has had an impact on that. But you'll see on the graph, the numbers of concerns raised and the number of investigations carried out over the years has risen in line with the registered volumes of powers attorneys and deputies. Based on 1920, concerns and investigations shown on the chart remain a comparatively tiny percentage of our overall registered caseload. So in 1920, 0.15% concerns were raised and 0.06% cases were investigated. That shows you the actual, low, tiny percentage of that 4.7 million that are currently on our register. The number of concerns raised last year in October to us were 504. The same this year, we've done 483, which is relatively similar. However, what we do is if we get a concern and we haven't got jurisdiction, we signpost. If we've got jurisdiction, as I said before, we'll investigate. So last year, we signposted 59% of the concerns and investigated 41%. This year, we signposted 71% of concerns and investigated 29%. Investigations have continued to rise within OPG from 2,883 But like I said, the increase is in line with the powers attorney on our register. The percentage of investigations that result in court action is 30%. In the majority of cases, no action is taken, so 53.4%, or additional measures short of court action are used to resolve any issues and get the attorneyship or deputyship back on track. Where cases are not appropriate for us to investigate, we offer advice or direct referrals to the right agencies such as yourselves or the police. In the context of over 4.7 million LPAs on the register, misuse is thankfully rare. Involving a solicitor in the process doesn't mean a lower likelihood of investigation being needed. So we're doing a lot more things digitally now. You can apply for an LPA. Unfortunately, had a signature authorised. It still needs a wet signature, so you have to print them off. But we are trying to look to change that position. The supervision, the deputyship caseload has been quite consistent over the year. It ended 1920 with 60,000 deputyship orders compared to 59,000 in 1819. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've covered when we investigate and what we look at in terms of financial abuse. In the first instance, we recommend people approach the local authority yourselves if someone suspects financial abuse. But like I said, our jurisdiction is limited and can only get involved if all that criteria is met. So we work with the local authorities yourselves and the police to protect the donor. Next slide, please. Okay. That's it from me. Thank you. Over to Paul.
Excellent. Thanks, Julie. We've had a number of questions come in, and so we'll, if it's okay with everyone, we'll be heading straight to the questions. I'll ask the questions that have come from the chat box first, if that's okay, and we'll get through some of them before we probably have to finish and go to the quiz before we close. The first one is, can the LPA ever be regarded as part of financial abuse? So I suppose you in part answered that question, Julie, but in your investigations, do you ever find the LPA is actually part of the financial abuse?
So I didn't get that, Paul. Sorry, cut out on me.
Sorry, have you ever found that the actual agreement, the lasting power of attorney agreement, is actually part of financial abuse?
The lasting power isn't an agreement as such. It's the donor's decision as to who they want to look after their finances or health and welfare should they lose capacity. However, an LPA can be used, the financial one can be used if they have capacity. So, you know, so that the donor, should they not be able to get out of the house, that the attorney can actually go to the bank and do things for them.
Okay. Next question. I think this is one for you, Iffy. How does the law consider verbal agreements prior to the identification of lack of capacity? So if someone says we had a prior agreement that I would behave this way, but actually now the individual no longer lacks capacity, so an LPA can't be reached.
So are we talking about an advanced decision then?
Yeah.
I see. And it's a verbal one?
Yeah.
Yes. A verbal decision is also always taken into account as long as you can actually establish that it did actually happen. And I know, in fact, there's some case law. There's a case law, in fact, where someone's wishes and feelings was taken into account via his wife as a result of what he said to her. It wasn't written, but the court took that into account. So yes.
Okay. So the next one is really maybe two questions about the LPA. The first part is where can we identify if someone we're supporting has an LPA? And if someone we're supporting can't afford an LPA, is there any support available?
Yeah, I think in the chat, I think Brett Smith, one of my colleagues in OPG, has said where they need to email the concern. So if you need a search done, I think as somebody in the chat, an OPG 100 search can be completed to see if there's a registered LPA in force.
I see.
And with regards to the fee has been reduced and reduced and reduced year on year. However, if somebody cannot afford the £82 that it costs for the LPA, they can apply for either an exemption or a remission. So an exemption is if they've got particular benefits, so they'll be completely exempt from the £82, or a remission is a means tested. So we're taking it with regards to their finances and may say, for instance, not 50% off the price of the £82. Does that answer that question?
I think so. I'm going to ask the next question because I don't understand the question, and hopefully you do. Can an LPA have a second, third and fourth successor? And can this be written into the will?
Into the will? Okay. So LPAs can have more than one attorney. They can have as many attorneys as they want. Okay. If they can also want to appoint a replacement attorney. So, for instance, if the attorney passes away, the replacement attorney is then enacted, so they can take over the attorneyship of that person and assist that donor. With regards to wills, that's a completely different thing that we don't get involved in, Paul. So wills are a different kettle of fish. But obviously, when we do investigate, a will is a very good document to see what the donor's wishes and feelings were. So, for instance, who they'd like to leave their money to. So we do take that into consideration when we investigate concerns.
Okay.
I hope that answered that.
The next one, I think someone answered in the chat, but I'm not sure that the question was completely answered. It's about the regular checks for those with an LPA. I think the answer was around the supervision by OPG, but those who have responsibility within an LPA, is there any check done on them? And is that regular or is that singularly?
Okay. So as you can appreciate, we've got 4.7 million LPAs on the register. So the Office of Public Guardian have only got 1,200 staff. So the Public Guardian has not got the capability to supervise 4.7 million attorneys. However, the 60,000 deputyships that we've got in place are supervised. They have first contact calls when the first court order is made, and they have to report annually to OPG through their annual report as to how they've supported donor and what finances has been taking place over the year. If they don't report to OPG every year, we have got a deputyship investigations team that may well take that on as an investigation, because not reporting may be a sign of abuse.
Okay. Sorry, I think that's it. And I think maybe the final question before we move on to the quiz, because I know lots of people want to leave at 12, so we won't extend the time. But the difference between an attorney and an appointee in terms of the LPA.
Okay, so an attorney is on an LPA. An appointeeship is to do with the DWP. So the DWP can be an appointee. If somebody's only in receipt of benefit, so that's the difference. An appointee is nothing to do with a lasting power of attorney.
I know I said that was the last one, but those who know me know I lie frequently. There's another last one. It was very similar. And it's just moved up. The difference between an LPA and deputyship.
So an LPA is an instrument that the donor has actually chosen who they want to act for them. So for instance, if I was to make an LPA, I may want my husband and my children to act for me should I need them to do so. A deputyship is when somebody, and that LPA, the donor, myself, needs to have capacity to have executed that, to have made that. A deputyship is when somebody has lost capacity and hasn't made an LPA. So for instance, if I lost my mental capacity and I hadn't got an LPA in place, nobody can act for me. So you have to apply to the Court of Protection to become a deputy, which is costly and very time consuming. Hence the reason why we're trying to make LPAs as common as a driving licence. That's in our mission to have that known. So the awareness, so that the persons have to have all the hassle of going to the court to become their deputy. Because also becoming a deputy also has fees, yearly fees as well. So if somebody can make it, if you can make an LPA now, you're choosing who you want to be. If somebody's going to court on your behalf and you haven't got the capacity, you may get somebody who you wouldn't have wanted to have acted for you. But that is the Court of Protection's decision.
Thank you for that. And
just to add to what Julie said about the LPA, the difference between LPAs and deputyship, it's also a good thing to have the LPA because you could actually have the powers start even before you lack capacity for finance, for property and affairs. So it doesn't have to start when you've lacked capacity for financial affairs, as long as the donor is happy for you to actually start, using those powers before you lack capacity. So that's a good side of it. Although that wouldn't apply to health and welfare. Health and welfare, it really applies when you lack capacity.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely right, Ife. Like I said, they can go to the bank for you, but if you've got capacity to make health and welfare decisions, and you can only make that decision. It's only when you've lost it to make those decisions.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Ife. And I have personal experience of that, and have to say, in my own family, for my own mother, it's very supportive that I have power of attorney in order that I can support her while she's finding stuff more difficult. And actually, her capacity fluctuates, as does my support, in order to match it. So brilliant. We have a number of questions we can't get to, and I apologise to those people whose questions I haven't asked, but we will get them to Iffy and Julie, and we will offer you the answer that you need. We have a final quiz to ask you. If people can, again, go to their links, and we will ask a final question. And there you are. You can see the answer already. How many LPAs are on the OPG register? 4.7 million. And Julie, while we're doing this, how many do you think there could be or should be?
Well, how many million have we got in the, we're only England and Wales, don't forget. So I don't know how many million people we've got in England and Wales, but those over 18, I'd like all of those. There
you go. I love you. I love your enthusiasm, Julie, but I suspect you might be a bit busy if that happened. Okay.
Tell me about it.
Julie, what's the answer?
4.7 million.
4.7 million. There you go. So I've learned a great deal, and thank you so much for your time. I also now know who to go to if I have questions around this. Julia, Iffy, have you got anything finally you'd like to say before we close?
Nothing else other than just to make sure that we all keep our eyes open. These financial abuses happen, and sometimes we just come across them by chance. You know, a typical example would be one of my cases where the reason the GP had gone into the adult's premises was because of some health and welfare issues. But in the process of actually making inquiries about the adult's health, she then came across a bank statement that showed £20,000 had gone out of the account, and then she raised an alert as a result. So that's just an example of, you know, someone that has some, I guess she's experienced in that field anyway, but she kept her eyes open and, you know, was a bit more observant than normal.
I think that's a fair point. Julie?
Yeah, just like I said, if anybody needs any help with any inquiries about OPG, the website's there. We've actually, this week, we've updated the website, OPG's website, to state what sort of concerns we can take on and how to report concerns. So what I'll do is I'll send that out I'll send the link out in the message chatter afterwards. So yeah, look on the website, encourage people to make LPAs. Don't make the fatal flaw of waiting and thinking, oh, I'll do that. But yeah, please. Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I suppose the final point from me that's been made across the 3 webinars is there's no excuse not to use one's professional curiosity and then to know what to do if one comes across financial abuse. There are vulnerable people that we're supposed to be supporting, and we do so well on occasion, but just missing that one can be significant. So be careful and be vigilant. All our information is available on the websites that are on the screen. This webinar and the questions will be also put on the websites on the screen. And I just need to say to Chelsea, who's on this, who's done all the work to get all this together. No one else has done anything. Thank you so much. It's been really worthwhile, and thanks for your support. And thank you everyone for attending. Have a good day, and hopefully I'll see some of you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Can't believe there's still 72 people on this call.
Paul, thank you. That was great. And thank you for the lovely comments at the end. Thank you.
No, it's genuine. I think you're brilliant, and it wouldn't have happened without your support. I apologise for being such a pain sometimes.
No, not at all. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
All right. I'll speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon.
Thanks, Chelsea. All right.